My name's Jamie Keech, and you're listening to the Resource Insider Podcast, where we talk to CEOs, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs in the mining and metals industry. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Resource Insider Podcast. Today my guest is none other than Simon Ridgway. Now, I met Simon earlier this year at a bar outside of a mining conference. We were introduced through a mutual friend, and Simon was introduced to me as a prospector who had spent many years working up in the Yukon and knew the area very, very well. Now, we chatted a little bit about exploration, but Simon had to head off to a dinner, and it wasn't until after he left that our mutual friend told me that Simon was actually one of the founders and the chairman of Fortuna Silver, a billion-dollar mining company based here in Vancouver with assets all over Latin America. The next night, I actually bumped into Simon again, this time at another bar, and this probably tells you something about our drinking habits here in Vancouver, and we ended up chatting in a bit more detail. Simon's early life reads very much like a Jack London novel. So if you've ever read Call of the Wild or White Fang, you know what I'm talking about. Simon left school at the age of 15 and basically decided he wanted to travel the world. He ended up sailing from his home in the UK to North America in the 1970s. Once he was there, he made his way to the West Coast. He hitchhiked then up to the Yukon. And when he landed in the Yukon, he decided he needed a job and got hired as what he would call a bush rat, which is essentially a manual laborer in the field working on mineral exploration projects. And he did this for the next few years to fund his winter travels down through Latin America and the Caribbean. And this led to a whole series of events that started with Simon becoming a part-time poker player in Dawson City, and then eventually a successful prospector and a very successful mining CEO and chairman. Now, the work Simon does is prodigious. You know, in addition to being the chairman of Fortuna Silver, he is the chairman of MedGold Resources. He is the chairman of Radius Gold, the chairman of Volcanic Gold Mines, and the chairman of Crops Inc., along with a lot of other interesting things that we get into in depth in this conversation. When I was talking to Simon, what really struck me is that he seems to be someone who spent his life doing exactly the thing he was meant to be doing. Simon is a passionate entrepreneur. He is a passionate explorer. And I can say with full honesty, he is truly one of the most interesting people I've ever had the opportunity to meet in the mining industry or otherwise. So if you are an investor and you are interested in better understanding the early exploration stage of the mining industry and how these projects get put together, how they work, this is the episode to be listening to. Or if you're already in the industry and you are thinking about or looking to make an entrepreneurial move, especially if it's in exploration, especially if you are looking at staking your own ground, your own projects, this is the episode to be listening to. I had a great time talking to Simon today. I think everyone will get a lot out of listening to this. So without further ado, let me please introduce Simon Ridgway. All right, Simon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview.
So thank you for coming today. You don't typically live in Vancouver. You live a few hours north of here. Are you in town for the conference today?
Yeah, I'm kind of in town Tuesday to Thursday every week in the summertime. I have a place at Pemberton, which is I can get a lot more work done there because a lot of my work is sort of research based, and to talk to the people on the phone, when I come to town, I get more caught up in things like this.
You're not constantly getting dragged into interviews and coffee chats when you're up in Pemberton, I suppose. No. Okay, so in leading up to this, I was thinking about how we met, and it was probably, again, at a conference. So for those listeners who aren't here, the Sprott conference is going on right now, and when Simon and I met, it was about last January, I think, at the Vancouver Roundup, and we were at one of the bars here in Vancouver and with a mutual friend, and we started chatting a bit about your background and what you did, and when I started this podcast 3 or 4 months ago, I knew you were one of the first people I really wanted to have on here because when I first got into the mining industry, I started at engineering school. I was 17, and I basically had all these dreams of adventure and grandeur and traveling the world and doing all these things. And it sounded just a lot like that's what you did, and you...
Yeah, in my earlier days. I mean, I was, I was sort of 18 years old in the mid '60s, and it was in those days everybody was packing a bag and hitting the road and drifting around India and different parts of the world. So I kind of got caught up in that travel addiction, we'll call it. And so I spent the next decade kind of on the road, different parts of the world.
I'd like to dig into that a little bit, but first I want to read a shortened list from what I found on the internet of what you're doing now. So, taking this, you are the chairman of Fortuna Silver, the chairman of Med Gold Resources, the chairman of Radius Gold, the chairman of Volcanic Gold Mines, the chairman of Crops Incorporated, and on the board of Rackla Metals.
It sounds busy, doesn't it? And maybe I'm a little overloaded, but most of those positions don't take a very active role. Mm-hmm. Jorge Ganosa and the team run Fortuna. I have little involvement on the management of the company. What I did do correct with Fortuna is back some very, very good people who've done a fantastic job with the company, and I stay involved because I really enjoy working with them.
Yep.
And they keep me involved because I think I have a little bit of input on certain things, acquisitions, the time to finance and negotiating deals with such as the Lindero with Jorge,
yes,
or the San Jose mine in Mexico. So, but it doesn't take on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't take very much of my time.
Well, I mean, what's interesting, I found particularly upon learning this, is none of these things were how I was introduced to you. When I met you, our mutual friend told me, "This is Simon. He's a prospector."
Yeah, and that's how I got involved in the industry. I mean, in my traveling days, going back to that again, I always wanted to go to the Yukon Territory. So some of my travels took me up there. I wanted to see that part of the world. But on arriving there, you got a place that's 3 times the size of England, which is where I was born, mm-hmm. and no roads. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, how do you get to see this place?
So when was this?
1975.
So you were backpacking around. You find your way to Whitehorse, I assume?
Yeah, I was backpacking around, and I did a bunch of sailing. So I sailed across the Atlantic and and that's how I first got to the Americas. I kind of hitched a ride on a yacht with some other people, got to the Americas, and then traveled across to the West Coast, got to Vancouver, and decided I was going to hitch a ride on a yacht going south. As it turns out, not many of the yachts in Vancouver go anywhere. They just kind of stay around the harbor.
Yeah.
So while I was there, I began a bit of research, and it suddenly, my childhood desire to see 2 places, one of which Patagonia and the other was the Yukon. I must have been a desolate childhood, I guess. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I saw ferries going north, and I took a ferry up to Port Hardy and hitched up to the Yukon.
So what was it that drew you to the Yukon in particular?
Just I knew from my childhood I wanted to go there, and seeing it on the maps and being that proximal to it, I said, well, let's go there. I can't get a ride on a yacht going back south again into the warm climate. So, and this would have been the spring of 75 or 76. I'm not sure.
So to place us, how old were you at that time?
22, 23 years old.
Okay, so when you get there, you kind of mentioned you fell into prospecting. Can you define what a prospector is and sort of how that's differentiated from a typical geologist?
You're right. Well, when I first got there, I fell into working in the bush as a bush laboring,
Yep.
line cutting, claim staking, and I didn't know anything about mining until then. So, and I did that for quite a few years, and then I would work on other people's projects and work with geologists and kind of pick their brain a little bit and learn the basics of geology. And then became a prospector, but I was more of a researcher. Like what I found out was that every spring I'd come back to the Yukon because let me wind back a little bit. I would work several months in the Yukon in the field doing that bush laboring work, mm-hmm. and then head to Latin America to enjoy the beaches and the other parts of Latin America in the wintertime. And every spring I'd come back through Vancouver and head up to the Yukon again. as I learned more about the mining market, I learned that, learning in Vancouver what the market was trending in, what the market was looking for.
So these are the different commodities
The
that
different
are
commodities.
popular
At that time, one year it'd be molybdenum, next year it'd be tungsten, what the market favored. It wasn't all gold in those days. Mm-hmm. So I go to the Yukon, sit in the mining recorder's office and do the research and come up with targets to go and prospect. Mm-hmm. But I would really target prospects that were already established. I would re-establish the results that people had got, try to put A and B together and employ geos to help me put it together, and then come back to Vancouver and vend it to public companies in Vancouver.
Okay, so when you say the prospect's already established, that means there's been some work that's been done on this claim.
That's right.
Whether that's soil sampling or hand samples or maybe some drilling.
Yeah. I mean, in Canada, the Canadian system is probably the best in the world, I think. Companies that to retain the ground you have to work on the concession, the claims every year, do a certain amount of work.
And spend a certain amount of capital each year.
Spend a certain amount of capital. And everybody files that work with the government. The results of your work stay private with the government until you drop the ground. And then that information becomes public information.
Yes.
Once that claims becomes open. So, you've got 100 years of people working in the Yukon doing professional work, recording the work, and actually we record the truth. What we do is what we file. Mm-hmm. There's no bullshit involved. We don't hide results. So you can research all that data and put the picture together. So people could be doing work looking for copper, but they would assay for other elements.
Right.
And that data would be recorded in the mining recorder's office, and you could record it or research it on microfiche. In those days, it was microfiche. Now it's a lot easier.
So do you actually go into the geological survey or one of the offices?
When I wasn't. So as the time went on in the Yukon, I initially began doing all that bush work. And then I can jump into this a bit later, but then I began kind of playing poker for a living up there in an old casino called Diamond Tooth Gerties.
And was that in Whitehorse?
That was in Dawson City.
Dawson, okay.
So I would spend my evenings at the poker table in Diamond Tooth Gerties, but I'd spend all my days sitting in the mining recorder's office going through microfiche till I couldn't see, and I'd have to go back and sleep again before the next poker game, basically.
Okay.
So I would do both. So the prospecting really interested me just because it was a way to get out in the field. You're in control of your own destiny. It was high risk, high reward, as the poker was. But mostly you're in control of your own destiny, right? So I would do the research, pass through Vancouver, find out what the market was looking for, go to the Yukon, do the research, find targets that I think would be attractive to the market, and then vend them to public companies in Vancouver. And I would get shares in the company and cash payments from the public companies and never go work on my ground.
Yeah, so let's take a moment and explain to people what that means. So to vend a project means you have acquired the claims of that project either in your personal name or the name of a company, a private company that you control.
Correct.
And to vend that means you essentially sell it to generally a publicly traded company here in Vancouver in exchange for, be it cash or stocks or some combination of the two.
And it wouldn't be a sale, it would be an option.
Right.
Okay. So I would option it to them whereby they make certain cash and share payments on signing, a bit like the project generators do now, except I was a private project generator.
Yes.
And I did that for several years.
Okay. So what instigated the transition from you cutting lines in the bush and hauling bags of rocks up hills to realizing you could basically be doing this yourself and getting the ground? Was there like an aha moment there where you were like, this isn't so hard? Or did someone sort of take you under their wing? How did that happen?
Actually, it happened because, as I said, I started playing poker in the Yukon, and then that became more and more of my income came from that. And then I went on a project with a guy that I worked for, Molly Barker, a very good friend and a person I've worked for several years. And myself, Molly, and another guy that worked with me called Mike Woods went into a project to do some staking for a client that Molly had.
Okay.
We couldn't stake because we got snowed out. So we were stuck in the truck for 3 or 4 hours waiting because the helicopters with the post couldn't get in. So we played poker. And it was kind of a friendly poker game, but at the end of the game, we got a bit carried away. Molly, the guy I worked for, owed me $1,500 from the poker game.
Okay.
Was I going to claim that money back from him? I don't really know, but it was a debt that was there. So Molly came to me one day and said, I've got this block of ground in the Wheaton Valley, which is the southern part of Yukon Territory. Rather than pay the money I owe you, why don't you take 50% of that block of ground and we'll try to option it up to somebody? The block of claims, right?
Yep.
It was a big block, a large block of claims. So I accepted that and then came to Vancouver that fall, and we optioned the ground off to a company called Omni Resources, and we received $25,000 on signing and 50,000 shares, which became worth $50,000. So suddenly I'd parlayed that $1,500 debt into like $35,000. I went.
So that was the aha moment.
That was actually the aha moment.
That this is potentially a more lucrative track than just poker.
There's poker. And let me go back a little bit. Everybody thinks that because of that I'm a wizard poker player, but to win a bit of money in the back of a truck from the guy you work for doesn't actually mean you played poker that well. It means you got a few lucky cards at that time. I did play poker professionally for 4 or 5 years after that in different parts of the world while I was doing this prospecting and researching.
Yeah. So this be like the winter months when you're
the
not
winter
out
months.
in the,
If I'll go to Aruba in the Caribbean or Antigua, different islands there, and play poker down there.
Huh. Yeah. So do you find you notice a lot of people actually in the mining space that are at least active amateur poker players, and it seems to attract.
There seems to be quite a field. It's a high risk. Playing poker is a high risk way to make a living or entertainment.
Yeah.
But it's certainly more skill based than luck based.
Yes.
But it is high risk, and the industry that we're in,
it's not
mineral
dissimilar.
Exploration, is very, very similar. Right?
Yeah. That even the most skilled people, I mean, they might win over the course of their career, but they can kind of lose any given hand.
On any given hand, and it's the same with poker. You can win. It's a long term. I mean, most poker players win over a long period of time, but any one night they can lose a lot of money because the cards dictate. At the end of the day, who wins at a certain period.
So, what was Dawson like in the 1970s?
Dawson was a huge amount of fun in the initial gold run in the gold price, right?
Yeah.
I mean, gold from 75 was trading at that low price, and then from 75 to 82, it popped way up, and the place became a very, very fun town. I'm not saying it isn't still. I haven't been there for quite a while now, but it was just a great place. And some of the best people, most straightforward, honest people I met in my life were still from the Yukon Territory.
Yeah. Do you spend much? Actually, let me take that back a step. How long did you spend in the Yukon, or how many years did you go back there?
I lived in the Yukon from 1975. Let me rephrase that. I summered in the Yukon from 1975 until I moved to Venezuela in 1992.
1992.
So, 17 years.
Okay. And presumably over that time you staked many land packages, you've flipped them to many companies.
Flipped them to many companies. And I think the change came in the flow-through days. I was getting very disillusioned with the more I learned about the industry, the more and how people made money in it, and the work that people did, and what was right and what was wrong. In the flow-through years, I would option. I believed in the research I did and the prospects I vended.
Yeah.
And I watched companies do shitty work on the projects I vended to them. So I began to think. I also began playing poker in Vancouver at that time as well.
Yeah. So
I was, I would meet with brokers and people that ran companies in Vancouver in the poker scene here, and began to realize that even though I haven't got much of an educational background, I was kind of I left school at 15 in the lowest division in the English school system.
Yeah.
I began to realize that I wasn't that stupid. The people I was
so you were kind of disenchanted
the brokers that were in the industry, the people running companies were just not. I wouldn't say they weren't that smart. They just weren't that much smarter than me.
Right.
So if they could do it, I could do it.
So that kind of leads me to my next question. When and how did you transition from running these little private companies and getting your claims and flipping them to other people or vending them to other people to actually taking a leadership role in a public mining or exploration company?
Probably by 1992. I came up with this idea. There were just it's all based upon the more I read, the more I enjoyed the industry, the mining, the exploration, the high risk of it, and the fact that there's so much data you can research in Canada to come up with ideas.
Yeah.
So I come up with ideas, and one winter I went down to play poker I spent the winter in Antigua, and I took suitcases of data down there with me, and and I rented an apartment, and I had the maps all over the floor and coming up with these ideas to stake a whole bunch of claims in an area called the Tombstone Mountains of Yukon Territory.
Yep.
And this was kind of before that whole, those low-grade Tombstone sweet intrusives became known to have these gold deposits. But I came up with a concept there that I would stake up 3 or 4 different blocks of ground, bring the projects, from this research in Antigua, and then come back to Vancouver, vend one of the projects to one of the majors, and then keep the others in a private company and take it public. Because I thought, if I could do a better job than the companies that were working on my ground in the Yukon.
And so vending that first project to a major paid for you to do the rest.
To the rest of the staking.
Yeah. So, and is that what happened?
That's what happened.
Yeah.
I formed a company called Tombstone Explorations, which is I found it was a very difficult name to take public, just because it's not a favorite. Tombstone Rock is pretty barren, really.
Yeah.
But I love the name.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I took Tombstone public in 1991, and it was a very, very tough market. And there was an Alaskan placer miner, quite a wealthy guy, and still a friend of mine, called Vern Hall, who agreed to purchase 50% of the IPO. In other words, 50% of the public stock in the IPO, if I would go to live in Venezuela upon the listing of the company, because it was a tough market. I could not get the support in the Vancouver. I mean, a Yukon prospector gambler coming down with twigs in his hair, trying to get listed in the black market wasn't happening. So Vern buying 50% of the initial listing company, if I moved to Venezuela and he had he was an alluvial miner, and he had some friends living in Venezuela.
Okay.
So the deal was that any alluvial prospects I found down there would go to his private company.
Right.
Any hard rock prospects I found would stay with the public company, Tombstone.
Into Tombstone.
Yeah.
Okay. So he wanted your expertise down there.
He wanted my expertise
and
down there.
You couldn't just go down there for a few months at a time. You had to be there.
We had to be there.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So the company was listed, I think, in November 91, and I moved to Venezuela the next day.
The next day, all right. So
So I mean, basically, we met down there, and we did a big tour of the whole Kilometer 88 region, and I moved down and lived in Venezuela from 91 to 94.
And you'd had a lot of experience, at least traveling around Latin America at that point. So you spoke Spanish.
I spoke some Spanish. Yeah. So not very much, but some enough to get by.
Yeah. And you showed up in Venezuela. What's Venezuela like in the 90s? It's not somewhere you'd want to be today.
No, it was then it was the place to be.
Yeah.
I mean, it was Colombia was not the place to be then.
Yeah, of course.
Venezuela was, and now that's been a complete switch in that. I mean, it was a great place. I met a lot of people down there. I've got 3 children from a Venezuelan wife that live with me here in Canada. And I've got some very good friends that still work with me. Mario Shortlander, who was a partner in most of my companies, many of my companies, who started Fortuna with me. Myself, Jorge Ganoso, and Mario started Fortuna. So it's still close to my heart. It's not a place I would go back to at the moment, or probably ever, to do mineral exploration.
Fair enough, yeah.
But it was a good place. It was a good place then. There was a lot of gold there. I got very lucky because I went down there in 91 and I struggled for a couple of years. I mean, I enjoyed prospecting, breaking rocks and seeing alteration, and there is all saprolite.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just...
And I presume the data that you'd become accustomed to sifting through in Canada was not available in Venezuela. So it's a very different style than you're used to.
It's a very different style that I was used to. We were chasing, people that were washing gold from samplerite and looking at those areas.
Right. So did you find any hard rock assets to put into Tombstone?
We acquired some hard rock assets. I mean, Vern had a friend of his, a guy called Eric Raguth, who's is a bit of a legend himself in the industry since. I mean, he was a placer miner in the Yukon, and he'd gone to live in Venezuela, and he'd been down there a decade. So that's what got Vern interested in going down there and wanted to put me down. So I had somebody to take me around and show me the better places to be. But basically what happened is 2 years later, I was still, I was living down there. I'd fly back every quarter to Vancouver to file the quarterly reports and get that done, and then go back to Venezuela again. But then a year and a half later, Robert Friedland made Venezuela the place to be.
Right, with Ven Gold, right?
With Ven Gold.
Yeah,
so everybody rushed to Venezuela. And I thought it was a good time to sell up and move on.
Yeah. So you sold all your?
I mean, I helped the company get financed. We raised, $40-50 million. I put some good skilled people came in to run it. Rick Clark, who was very well known in the industry, came in as president, and I stepped back as kind of the infield operator. The share price went way up. The company was financed, and I cashed in.
Sounds good.
I wanted to, and all of a sudden I found myself running a team of 30 or 40 people in the Venezuelan field, and I said, I don't want to be here. Well, it's not my skill set.
I wanted to ask you about that because you see there's a lot of different roles in the industry, and you see some people that are, excellent administrators or leaders of companies, and then there's people on the other side that are excellent entrepreneurs and starting and creating these companies, and you probably fall more into the entrepreneurial side, I assume.
Yeah, I like creating them and coming up with the ideas and usually, try to sell the project, sell the company, or, in Fortuna's case, it's a bit of a different story. We can get to that in a while. But for the most part, once a company's of a certain size and you can see it's got its own direction,
right,
I would rather move on.
Take a step back at that point, or cash out.
Oh, cash out. So at that point with Fortuna, I left it with good management, well-financed, with good projects in Venezuela. And all those years, I was flying back and forth from Venezuela to Canada, to Vancouver.
Yeah.
I'd fly over the Caribbean, and I kept looking down at all those rocks and mountains in Central America, and I got hungry to be back in that kind of terrain where you could actually climb and you didn't have to slip on the satellite.
Right.
You could actually break a rock.
So what did that lead to?
So I came back to Vancouver, and I took over a shell company which at that time was called West Resources, and went on a tour of all the countries in Central America and decided on Honduras. So I located myself in Honduras.
So at this point, you had no claims. You had
no
a
claims.
little bit of money in the company.
The only money in the company was the money I put in. So I took control by putting $1 million into the company, and took control of the company by doing that.
So can I ask a question for my own curiosity? What's the advantage to starting with a public company like that as opposed to doing that, putting $1 million of your money into a private company and acquiring these assets?
I have never really assessed the advantage of it. I guess you got liquidity right away.
Right. Okay.
Right. So as a private company, I'm not going to go and did I think it was a smart move 6 months, 12 months later? No. Living in Venezuela living in Tegucigalpa in Honduras with a 1976 Land Rover and a Venezuelan girlfriend, and saying, okay, do I really think I'm going to go find a mine here, Simon? On my weaker moments, I thought I was crazy.
So what was it that brought you down there to Honduras?
Well, I went to all the countries down there. The Central American geology is very, very interesting. I knew but what did I know about geology at that time? I knew about epithermal gold deposits. I'd learned quite a bit about them in the time in Yukon, reading about them. Central America has got lots of volcanoes and hot springs and rhyolite domes and all the things that tend to be where epithermal gold deposits are focused. So that got me the Ring of Fire story. Mm-hmm. So I traveled through Central America, visited every country, and found out where there was no competition, basically. All Panama, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Mexico had lots of people working. Honduras, there was nobody there. There was very little competition in the country. So I chose a place where they got very similar geology, but there was no competition. As I've joked many times, to people would ask me, and I said, well, I'm not very good at what I do, so I have to go where the competition is pretty weak. So I went to Honduras.
And what did you find there in the end?
I made a couple of gold discoveries.
Okay.
We from the research, again, there was data, historic data that you could research in the mining office in Honduras. From the research I did, it became evident that nearly all the gold deposits in Central America were at least spatially related to hot spring centers.
Okay.
If not directly, but at least spatially related to them. So, and there were books. Companies had been to all of Central America and created in the 70s these well-documented all of the hot spring centers in that part of the world, looking for geothermal deposits. So from that, I was able to, number one, had road maps to exactly where every hot spring was in Honduras initially. And then also a description of the hot spring. It was a silica centers with them or no silica centers, because you need silica if you're going to have a gold deposit. So I went to those hot springs one by one and took samples from them and found a couple of gold mines because of that.
So you've had you've had some good successes, and what is it? So when do you decide to walk away from a project? Well,
Yeah, I think that's just like when you decide to walk away from a certain poker hand. You have to, I think when you first start, let me simplify it. You start taking samples on a project. You get there, you take a few samples, you get some good numbers. The more work you do, the better it gets. There's a certain point where that starts to level off. At that point, you should bring in a joint venture partner.
Right. Yeah.
Doesn't mean the project's dead at all. It just means that it needs more science than you can give it because you're not been able to follow it simply.
Yeah, and I think what you just described is a trend amongst the very successful people in the industry, that they know when to bring in other people, or they know when they've done what the most they can do and then they need to take a step out. It's when you see these people either falling in love with the project or perhaps falling in love with their idea of their role in that project that sometimes it can stagnate.
Sometimes it can stagnate. If you look at I've had several discussions with some very, very smart people in our industry about the project generator model, and I don't really believe in it that well. And I think most project generators project generate until they find a project that they want to do themselves.
Of course,
Virginia Gold. That was a project, one of the effective project generators, but they didn't. When they found the main deposit, they drilled it off themselves.
Yeah.
Evram is a case example right now.
Evram
is a project generator, doing a great job. They found a project now are they vending that project? No, they're going to stay with it. Maybe until they think it's going to take too much drilling to understand it. But they're not going to generate. They're not going to joint venture it right now. I'm predicting that's the case. But I'm not 100%. But
I know that's the case. Actually, I had a chat with Patty Nichols, and he said, we've been looking for years, and this is the one.
There you go. We're going to. So that the project generator, and as a private company, that's what I did. I did it for quite a few years and made money at it. But because I think what you do as a project generator, and they said, going back to this is a private company when I did it, you somehow look for projects you can sell.
Right.
You're not particularly looking for projects which you really believe in. Your mindset is, can I market this?
Yeah.
Not, is this really got a chance of discovery? There's a difference.
And so who is buying these projects off? There's the ones that are the majors where the amount of work that would need to do
exactly
is cost prohibitive to a junior. But then there's the other group, which are the promoters. So if a project generator sells it to them, they might sell it to the market, right?
They might be able to sell it to the market, and lots of projects that you find early stage warrant work on it. It doesn't mean you don't believe in the project; you just don't believe in it enough to spend your own money on it.
Fair.
Drilling.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the company that you are most well known for, which is Fortuna Silver. Okay. It's a $1.14 billion market cap today.
Right.
When did that get its start, and what was the genesis of that?
Well,
and I should add, and you are the chairman of that right now.
I'm the chairman of that company right now, and one of the founders of it with Jorge Ganosa and Mario Sholando. Jorge worked with me as a geo. I met Jorge in Guatemala. What year would have that been? Probably 1998, 99. Just after I'd sold my West, I started a company, which I still have, called Radius.
Yep.
And I went back into the region again. Jorge was working in Guatemala. He'd left college a year or two before, university, I should say, as a geological engineer. And he'd gone to work in Guatemala because he had a couple of good friends that were Guatemalan that he went to school with, and he believed that was an area to explore.
And is Jorge Peruvian? Am I right?
He's
on that?
Peruvian,
yes,
yeah.
Okay.
He's Peruvian geological engineer. So Jorge worked with me for a couple of years, and basically he would go into countries first, and like Nicaragua and Haiti, and looking for projects that we would then send a team in afterwards. And so Jorge would do the initial scouting in those countries.
Okay.
So then he came to myself and Mario and said, well, his family used to be silver miners from Peru. He believed silver was going to have a strong future, share price-wise. Would we grub stake him to find a silver mine in Peru?
And so grub staking is where you sort of provide the seed capital that allows them to do the initial work.
Exactly.
So you said
provide the
yes.
seed capital so he could go and find a mine that we could buy.
Right. So you did that.
We did that, and that took about a year and a half, 2 years to come up with the first project, and we purchased a mine from a famous Peruvian family, the Hochschild's, called the Cayoma mine. They had been mining it. It had been in production for 500 years.
500 years.
500 years.
Okay.
It's been in production.
And was it a
they were
big
mining
open
these
pit
really
mine at this
high-grade
point?
ruby silver veins.
Okay, so it's a narrow underground mine.
Yeah, narrow underground mine. But some of the initial veins weren't not narrow, but they were high-grade underground mines.
And 500 years in, they're
500 years in, all those big ruby silver veins had gone, and it had come down to the lead zinc silver veins.
Right.
There was still silver in them, but it was about 50% base metal, 50% or less silver on the income. So the Hochschilds had shut the mine down just because they didn't want to convert the mill
and the processing cost would have been
exactly.
Yeah.
So we thought silver was going up, but lead and zinc were looking not too bad. So we negotiated and purchased the mine. I think we paid $6 million for it.
Okay. And this was in '99.
This would have been in 2005.
2005. Okay.
Yeah. So 2003, I started group stake in Jorge. 2005, we acquired the first mine, which was the Cayoma mine. We took a loan from, I think it was called Quest, but it would be like Sprott lending. It was the equivalent, same people pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Took a loan from Sprott, made the purchase, and Jorge and the team he put together put the mine back in production.
And this became Fortuna Silver.
This became Fortuna Silver. Started out with the 25-cent stock. And we had a bunch of hiccups on the way, but I mean, luckily, the person that came to me for grub staking as a geological engineer turned out to be the first class person and a first class company CEO.
Well, I actually was thinking about that. So Jorge at this time would have been, 25 or something like that? Yeah. He's a Peruvian mining engineer who's looking
geological engineer.
Sorry, geological engineer. What was it that made you basically want to back him for 2 years until...
Well, he'd worked for me for a while, and from the time we met, we'd had a good relationship. He was very professional from day one, and very, very enthusiastic to get his own play going.
And now is Jorge the CEO of Fortuna today?
He is. He's still running it, with his brother, Luis Canosa, who is the CFO.
Yeah.
His father came in initially and worked with them on Fortuna. So between him, Jorge and his father, they put the mine back in production. Yeah. And then sometime in the next year, there was a company called Continuum Resources that was at a project in Mexico that had put a couple of drill holes in. And the market didn't seem to care. I saw those results, and we took a look. Jorge went down and took a look at that and liked what he saw. So we took over Continuo, and that's the San Jose mine right now.
Okay, yeah.
Which is a huge cash producer for the company.
And you also now have a third mine in Argentina.
Yeah,
right
which
now,
we're building at the moment.
Right.
So we purchased the Gold Rock mine.
So over the last 13 years, this went from nothing to 3 mines. 2 operating, one in
production. And we, from 2010 until 2017, we didn't go to the market. Like, we just made money from mining.
Yeah.
That's how good Jorge and the team he's put together are. We raised $100 million to make the purchase of Lindero.
Yeah.
But
not to run the operations
No.
No. It's very interesting, someone that can go from, doing initial scouting missions all over Latin America to actually running a mine and then running quite a big company.
Quite a big company and running it very professionally. Yeah. I mean, I think Fortuna's delivered on time and on budget pretty much everything they've done.
And now it's worth over $1 billion.
It's worth over $1 billion, and it's going to grow
share
from
price.
here. Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to provide context for people. You said Jorge is from it's from a well-known mining family in Peru, right?
His family were.
You see that in Peru.
His great-grandfather was a mining magnate in Peru.
Yeah,
one of the wealthier families in the country.
And it's interesting. You see that there's several of them, right? These families that generation after generation they own mines. Their children become geologists and mining engineers and what have you, and they've built up quite a family business, right?
Built up quite a family business.
And it sounds like it kind of almost merged a little bit of that with Fortuna by bringing in his brother and his father at some point, and sort of that cultural know-how and the ability to get things done in the country.
No, Hoy's done a fantastic job, and continues to do a fantastic job with the company. I mean, right now we have a market cap of 1.2 billion. We had, once we have the Lindero in production in Argentina, that'll double our cash flow, which should double our market cap. Double our cash flow, yes.
Wow. So when's that going to come online?
July 2019.
2009
is a predicted date.
We're about a year out.
We've been on time, on budget, everything that Fortuna has done so far. Doing that in Argentina is a bit more challenging than the last, but Oaxaca was challenging as well with the San Jose. But so I don't expect that we will be particularly over budget or particularly late. So I think by mid-year 2019, we will start producing, and by the end of that year, we'll be doubling our cash flow.
And is the hit the Argentinian currency has taken lately helping?
It's been a little bit of help, but it also makes us a little bit nervous, right?
Sure,
because there's a little more chaos in the country. But I think that the new government's done a great job to date. Let's see.
So, I mean, there's a lot of people out there right now that'll be listening to this, and a lot of them will be in the industry that are, they're prospectors or would-be prospectors. They're looking for their own projects. They're trying to do something similar to what you did earlier on in your career. Is there any advice you'd be able to give a younger geologist or prospector or engineer that's trying to step out of maybe a corporate role or working for other people and start looking for their own thing?
Don't. No, I'm joking. I mean, it's a very exciting industry. I do think it's a lot tougher now than it was, because there was a lot of low-hanging fruit to be picked when I first went to Honduras, for example. I had good success there. We found mines in Honduras. We found a mine in O2 in Guatemala, and it is tougher now.
Well, there's the internet now too, right?
Yeah, there's the internet now. And there's a lot more access to data right now. Absolutely. I mean, basically, I think one thing that I was always focused on success more than money. I mean, money was not my driving point. It was just I wanted to achieve something in my life at that time, and I saw an opportunity and the excitement and thrill of making. There's nothing like the excitement and thrill of making something out of nothing, which is what you do by being a prospector.
Yeah.
You don't create the deposit, but you find it, and then you go back there, and there's a mine there that wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for you.
Yeah. So you really need that. I guess that kind of internal compass driving for something like that. I mean, there's probably easier ways to make money.
There's probably easier way to make money. Yeah, but you need that drive.
So
you need that drive.
Just looking at your resume here and these list of positions you hold now, I noticed something between that and a lot of other very successful entrepreneurs in this space is that a lot of people seem to always be doing 4 or 5 things at the same time, and they've got.
And I'm not sure that that's a right way to go. Initially I had one company. Radius was my second company. I made such a great deal with Radius on a project in Nicaragua with a company called Meridian that I thought Radius was finished, and so I started Fortuna with Jorge. I mean, I thought they were going to drill off a large deposit, and the company was going to be gone.
Yeah.
It looked that good, the project we had and the deal I had with Meridian. So I started Fortuna. I also started a company called Northland, which also became a $1 billion company. It turned out to be a disaster at some point because I left it. It's a long story that I won't get into too much, but basically we picked up an iron deposit in Finland and Sweden when iron prices were high. At some point, we raised $100 million for that company. We had a $750 million market cap. We did a PEA on the iron deposit, and the PEA said, this thing doesn't work.
So what do you do?
So what we do is I tried to, by then we'd put on, I had a person running it that I'd put in called Buck Moreau, an American that was a good mining engineer, I thought, and I thought he was quite loyal. But we also put on 3 or 4 politicians, one from Norway, one from Sweden, one from Finland, to give us some flexible, contact in the government there. When it became evident to me that the market was so now it's 2008, the market's collapsed. We got $100 million in the bank, and we're spending $5 million a month on engineering on the project that the PA said doesn't work.
Right.
So I tried to get the board to switch into gold projects, right? Because there were companies like Heckler knocking on my door saying, "You got $100 million. We need a loan," kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're right after Boat Green Creek. The board wouldn't shift. Their argument was it's not about the shareholders, it's about the stakeholders. And I'm saying, well, but it was the shareholders that put up the money. So I fought that battle for about 6 months. And then when I couldn't get the board to change, I walked away.
You were off.
So the company continued on and finished up losing $2 billion.
Losing $2 billion.
$2 billion.
So it was $1 billion company.
And then they then went to the bank and loaned $1 billion, built the mine. And I think the mine was in production for approximately 3 months.
And it didn't work, obviously.
It didn't work out at all.
How did, I mean, I won't get too much into this, but presumably that PEA was public. It's a public company.
Yeah.
So that was, I mean, so shareholders and bankers and all the rest had the opportunity to read this PEA that said it's not going to work.
Well, the PEAs that we had said it was going to cost $1.2 billion to build a mine. And you know, so by the time they went to the banks to take the loan to build it, it had drifted down to 800 million. It's only going to be an $800 million build.
Yeah.
So they went to the banks, took the loans. So, I mean, how they succeeded in that, I'm not really sure. But at the end of the day, it took 1.3 to build. So
that's a lot of money.
Anyway, let's park that story.
So instead of that, let's talk about what you're working on today.
Okay.
You're involved in several companies, as we discussed earlier. One of the most interesting ones right now is, and from my opinion, MedGold.
Yeah.
It's an exploration company. It's got a $35 million market cap. It's focused in Serbia. You're the chairman there.
Yeah, and it is actually it's been financed and joint venture with Fortuna Silver Mines.
Okay.
So basically, MedGold was started. A bunch of geos I know, English geologists I knew, had some interesting projects in a company called MedGold, in a private company called MedGold. They had some projects in Spain and Portugal. Projects looked interesting. The geologists running it were interesting. So they asked me to help them go public. So I put it together with a shell I had. Mm-hmm. And we listed it and went on. The projects in Portugal and Spain didn't work out. Mm-hmm. So at some point, on some advice from a geo working for me, we took it into Serbia and began doing some work on a certain belt in Serbia. And I think we made a pretty interesting discovery. I mean, it's early stage.
Yes.
We spent about a year and a half trying to get it permitted, just through complications on that particular. I don't think Serbia is that hard to work in, just that particular situation.
Okay.
So we finally succeeded and put the first 7 holes in over the last couple of months, and every hole hit. I mean, we stepped out. We did big step outs. We had an exposure that ran 85 meters of 5 grand at surface. It looked pretty limited in size, but the geophysics we did said it extended for about 1.5 kilometers one way and about 400 meters north. So
when you say at surface, how was this take? Was this like a trench sample?
It was an outcrop.
Yeah. It was an outcrop. Okay,
that was sitting there.
So
it had been worked on before by Dundee. Unfortunately, Dundee didn't do the geophysics. They drilled it. And then, if you look at the holes that were... Yeah, they put 4 holes in and missed. We did geophysics and put 7 holes in and hit with all 7 so far.
And you've been getting 3 to 5 grams per ton in different places.
Over broad intercepts in a detachment fault. So with the last hole, we put 30 meters of 5 grams, 30 meters of 3.5 grams. Good hits. Mm-hmm. The geophysics says it's got a good chance of extending. I mean, you look at the Dundee holes, it's outside the geophysical anomaly.
Right.
All our holes are just inside of it. The anomaly continues for 1.2 kilometers, I think, and about 400 meters north-south. Every hole we put in that anomaly so far has hit broad zones of good gold grades with lead, zinc, silver.
So what's the plan going forward on that? To just
start
define that
next week. Yeah.
Next week. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Anything else investors should hear about on that or watch out for? Any milestones?
I think we're going to keep hitting those kind of grades, thicknesses. Obviously, there's we've got to get it. The holes it's not been consistently in that 3 to 5 gram range. There's been areas where we've been down to sort of 0.5 gram, and I don't think that's going to be mineable. I think we need to stay in that 2 gram plus range, just because of the sulfide content with it. It's not oxide.
Yeah.
This is not a heap leach deposit. But it is going to be open pittable, and it is going to be 3 to 5 grams. Okay. So if we keep on with those results, it could be very significant.
Yes, certainly. So is there anything else you're working on that we should hear about now?
Well, Radius has been my stalwart company. It's very slow. I mean, we've got some projects in Radius I've got some projects in Radius in Guatemala. I've had for a long time.
Yeah. That
is close to the Bluestone Cerro Blanco deposit, which I discovered way back when and sold to Goldcorp.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have a big land position there that's very, very prospective. I'm not going to drill it till I see Bluestone get into production because, as you know, Tahoe's not in production right now. It's been shut down. Capis Cassidy, which is on another deposit I discovered, which we mined. They were mining it. They've also been shut down. So until Bluestone's got that in production, I'm not going to spend any money on that land position that I have. We also have a couple of projects in Mexico, one of which is going to get joint ventured shortly to a significant company. And we have 2 or 3 projects in Nevada, which I really like, which have gone back to my kind of hot spring targeting routes. And I'm going to be drilling those over the next year or 2. And Radius is well financed. We have between cash and shares in various companies. For example, Radius owns 10 million shares of Medgold.
Yep.
We got, a position in Fortuna. It's got a position in Focus. So
there's quite a few synergies and relationships between these companies.
I mean, basically, I put my money where my mouth is, and the companies I back and the people I back. And Radius is, if I can persuade the board of Radius that the projects these companies have are worthwhile, they put a bit of money into that because we have, probably about 10 million in cash and shares in Radius, and my burn rate is very low in the company.
Do you get to spend much time in the field yourself these days?
As much as I can. I mean, let me rephrase that. Yes, I do. I've just, I go down to Nevada quite a bit. I've just come back from survey a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
That's what I like. I like being in the field. I also like being at my home in Pemberton and researching data as well. So
no plans to retire from that anytime soon?
I love the business. Why would I retire? Yeah. I mean, you retire from something you love doing. It doesn't make any sense, does it?
So a lot of people who are listening to this are going to be retail investors at home. They're probably going to find a lot of these things really interesting. If you're a retail investor, you're not a mining or geological expert. Is there any advice you have for looking at these earlier stage plays?
I guess you've got to take a look at the burn rate of the company on a monthly basis. I mean, I've got a company called Crops right now, which is a phosphate deposit in Peru. There's still a lot of luck in whatever we do in our industry. When I got involved in this Peruvian phosphate deposit, the phosphate price was $180 a ton. It did come down from $450.
Yep.
So I looked at the phosphate price and thought, what? It seems to be at the bottom. David Cass, who would run the company for me at that time, come up with a good explanation why this basin in Peru is a good place to drill out phosphate deposits. So we got involved in it. And, we drilled off probably 500 million tons of a reasonable grade phosphate close to the surface. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the phosphate price has gone from 180 to 80.
Right.
So right now, phosphate, to mine it as a phosphate deposit of fertilizer is not economic. I found economic ways to mine it, to use it for industrial purposes. Phosphate is used in many different things. For instance, P4, it's a kind of a dangerous element, but it's known mostly for explosives, but it's used in weed killer, it's used in fire retardants, it's got multiple uses, used in engine oil. So if
if you mine it and process it to this P4, you can sell it at a higher price?
It's much higher price. Yeah. It takes 10 tons of phosphate rock, 8 to 10 tons of phosphate rock to make 1 ton of P4.
I see.
But P4 sells for $3,000 a ton. And the only producers right now, there's only one producer in North America and Europe, and that's Monsanto. But they use all of their own production, so it's locked.
So what's the bottleneck there? Is it the processing of it?
The processing, and it's a highly, it's not a very well liked, white phosphorus is not very well liked. It's used as an explosive. Yeah. It's got many positive uses. It's also got many negative ones. So I don't think there's anywhere in North America or Europe you can put a new plant. Mm-hmm. The only producers right now are China, Kazakhstan, and North Vietnam. So all of the use in all of the companies, big companies that use it in North America and Europe, have to buy it from those 3 markets. The Chinese market is now being shut out. They put a 25% premium on any phosphate leaving. So you get Kazakhstan, North Vietnam. So if we could convince a company to put to not just build a mine in Bayava, but build a mine and put a P4 plant, it'd be very economic. Mm-hmm. And I think you could permit it there. So we're talking to several of the large companies right now that are involved in this industry, making fire retardants for skyscrapers, using it in motor oil. I'm not going to name the companies because I've got CA signed, and that's why I can't put out any news on it, because everybody I've talked to in this industry, in the phosphate industry, wants you to keep quiet, because if their suppliers know they're going to build a plant themselves, they may stop supplying them.
Right. And so phosphate's quite a tight industry, right? There's only 4 or 5 companies that almost control the entire thing, from what I understand.
Yeah. Huh. Anyway, so if I can keep, and there's an if there, if I can keep crops financed for the next year or two, like I have for the last 5, at what point it'll be very, very good investment. But the other side is, if I don't, it'll finish up with nothing. Well,
you mentioned keeping the burn rate low. And have you managed to do that at Crops?
For the most part, corporately, yes. Unfortunately, the concession we hold in Bayava, we have to mine gypsum. So it is a mining, Crops is a mining company. We mine gypsum and sell it.
Yes.
We sometimes be able to sell it at a loss, because if we can sell it locally, it costs about $7 a ton for us to mine it. It's just a precipitant on the surface. If we can sell it locally, which we do sometimes, we make $4 or $5 a ton. If we have to transport it to the port and ship it to Ecuador to sell it, we lose $3 or $4 a ton.
And do you have to keep mining in order to keep your permits? Is that
exactly? Yeah, okay. We have to keep. We cannot stop mining. The contract we have for the permit is we have to mine a minimum 80,000 tons a year of gypsum.
I see.
So the holding costs on the crops are probably about $750,000 a year for us to hold the concession.
Well, this is something I've been interested in, actually. Phosphates in general. Any speculation on the price of that? We are at not at an all-time low, but nearly an all-time low.
We need and it's been going down since 2008. So it's been going down now for 10 years.
Well, I talked to Rick Rule about this about a month ago, and he said he was very bullish on phosphates at this point as well. And I mean, not a lot. You don't hear a lot about it these days.
You don't hear a lot about it. There's been a lot of big transactions lately, which is usually an indication we're at the bottom of the market. Mm-hmm. But if you try to go finance fertilizers right now, you won't get in the brokerage house doors. I mean, if I go around to Toronto, New York, London, say I've got a fertilizer project, everybody goes, "Oh, good luck."
Fair enough.
But
good thing you've got 5 other things on the go here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But I keep financing crops myself and my associates and people that are close to me. So we believe it is. There's no doubt it's a unique asset. It's a large deposit, world class, close to the surface, right beside the ports to ship it out. Can I get someone interested in this P4 operation along with the mine? Let's see.
And this comes down to, I mean, a lot of success in the mining industry in general is just playing the cycles right. And
playing the cycles right.
This will probably be a great...
And there is some luck in that. He came to me and said he thought the silver price was going up. Did he have a magic ball? No. Somebody came to me later on and said they think the phosphate's going to go up. I took a look at it and said, yeah, it probably is. So I got involved. And so far I've been like dragging a sack up a hill for the last 5 years.
But someday it will. And
someday it will.
If Crops is still around and going strong then it'll be a very different story, I would guess.
That's right. No, at $150 a ton, Crops would generate hundreds of millions of dollars from the deposit we have there.
All right.
For 100 years. It's not a small deposit. This is a world-class deposit. So... Anyway, that's Crops. Very high risk, very long-term investment, and another company that I'm chairman of, I grub-staked and I have a company called a guy called Jamie Crozer running a company called Volcanic in Guinea.
Okay.
We picked up a great project in Guinea. We've had a very, very complicated year trying to re-permit the area. When I took the company on, I was informed by the people that took it from that the Guinean management that was in place were very, very good and very reliable.
Yes.
Turned out not to be the case. So we've been spending the last year trying to replace them. And I think we finally have been successful. I think in the next month the permits on the projects we have, the Mandiana projects, will get reissued. And Jeremy, who's a very, very good geo with a very, very good team, and one hard-working guy, I think that will get the permits will get reissued and we'll be up and running again.
And this is Volcanic Gold Mines. So what stage is that at? Is this early exploration? Has drilling started?
No, it's got a resource of about 500,000 ounces drilled off on the Mandiana North. The Mandiana South, the second half of the project that we haven't drilled yet, has got artisanal miners all over the place. It looks very, very promising. But we have to get the permit and get drilling again.
Fair enough. So today we've spoken about Fortuna Silver, Med Gold Resources, Volcanic Gold Mines, and crops. As well, I think we touched on Radius Gold as well.
We touched on Radius, which is, yeah.
So if listeners have any interest in learning more about what you're working on, anywhere in particular you'd suggest they look, or just go to the website?
Just go to the websites of the company or the website of Gold Group.
And we'll put those in the show notes. So
okay.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Simon.
No, thank you very much for the time.
All right, take care.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Resource Insider Podcast. If you're interested in getting access to the biggest deals and best opportunities in the mining and metals industry, go to capitalistexploits.at and sign up for Resource Insider now.